It's preparing. Okay. Great. We're now live on YouTube.
Yay!
I will put in the chat here so that you can see. I'll put in the chat section. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. And I'm really excited to have you on here, Joyce.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here, Stephanie. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. Yay! So I'm just going to it doesn't echo in. But first, I'm just going to introduce you. It's been a long time coming. You've been on our platform. And now what we're going to do is I'm going to just give a quick synopsis of your background as I'm introducing you to our audience. So Joyce Osei is a published co-author, having contributed her personal story in Voices of Hope, business analyst, and to be champion of diversity and inclusion. She's a mother of 2 children, a wife, and loves to travel. From an early age, Joyce has been fascinated with storytelling and loved to create and tell her own stories. Joyce has published her first children's book, which is called The Adventures of Amma and Cressy in Barbados. Joyce is very passionate about providing access to diverse role models and particularly increasing the representation of BAME women in the workplace. First of all, again, I've been saying it many times, but thank you for having creating time to speak with us. And what I love about this conversation is that I feel like it's so perfect. The timing is completely perfect with what's going around the world with Black Lives Matter,
Yeah.
the of diversity and inclusion really being brought to the forefront. And I think what I love about it is navigating from this diversity conversations about diversity, and it's like, no, now people are really talking about tangible solutions, things that go beyond just talking, but rather on how you as an individual, how you as an organization, what are you doing to break that? What are you doing to help your employees speak up? And when it comes to bullying and harassment, what are the steps? And I'm glad to have you, especially with the need for us to have more role models and for women, especially the older generation, to be more open and giving back to the generation. So I think what I think we're in the topic of role models. Who were some of your role models growing up?
Yes, I'd say the role models that I had, they started with my family. So it was very much, my mom, my grandma, my grandparents, all my family really, my stepfather and my aunts and uncles, because they were all very much part of my upbringing. And those were the people that I saw every day. And, they demonstrated certain qualities, even though I didn't know it at the time, particularly around resilience. I look up to my mum because she's a very resilient person. And she's always worked. She's still working now. And, even for example, my grandma, she is very bold and courageous woman because she comes from Barbados, but actually came to England when she was quite young to study nursing, and then ended up meeting my grandfather, who's from Barbados, and then moved to Barbados later in her life. So I was really, I think I was blessed to have a variety of different role models, and it all started with my family.
What I also like is that it's quite unique because you have both Ghanaian but also Caribbean influence with your upbringing.
Yeah.
How having this diverse, because I think a lot of people, they, you know, when they see black they tend to think of the same thing, but obviously there's a wide variety within that. So
Yeah.
what was the African and the Caribbean upbringing?
Yeah, I think I didn't have anything to compare to because that's what I've always known. It wasn't until, you know, I grew up and then you reflect and you think, wow, okay, that was really unique. So I had access to family members and going to meet family members in Barbados. But because I was born in Ghana as well, I grew up very much in a very strong Ghanaian culture as well. So yeah, I think it's really helped me, and it's been the inspiration to draw on, which is why I was able to create the Adventures of Amma and Kwesi.
I think going back into typical childhood, what would you say was your favorite subject in school?
Oh, my favourite topics at school. Brilliant question. I loved English very much at school. English was my favourite subject. Also food technology and geography. And I love cooking now. All those subjects actually still show themselves up in my daily life and in my career. So yeah, those are my favourite topics.
Okay. With technology and geography, these can be obviously polar opposite topics, you know, with how they could correlate. How do you say that these subjects have helped you in your career?
Yes, I'd say certainly with the English side of things, that has been the key one in my career because I spend, I now spend a lot of time telling stories, either about myself or sharing information, but in the form of a story to teams, and being able to communicate to people all day, every day. So English has featured a great deal in my whole career. And yeah, that's
Okay.
been the enabler.
And I think looking at your career, you're an author, you're a speaker, and you are also have a business analyst background. Now, what would you say has motivated you to have a career, especially since having all and still being an advocate and being a front runner for diversity and inclusion? How what has motivated you to come to this point, or what has motivated you not to only enter each of these different careers, but to have all of them almost simultaneously as well?
Great question. I think for me, over time, I realized that I thrive in an environment where I'm collaborating with people and that I'm able to be creative. And, you know, whether that's either creating solutions or services that basically delight the client, that's where I thrive. And so initially, I was working on the first Women Awards, which was very much about showcasing trailblazing women across different industry sectors. And it was when I was working on that project that I was headhunted by a gender diversity company. And that was where they um, basically opened the door to this whole new world in diversity and inclusion. And when I saw what was available in terms of the opportunity and being able to help women advance their careers, because that's what that company did. They were very much about helping women to progress their careers, whether they were in banking and finance, in engineering, in technology, across the board. It was very much about equipping women so that they were able to progress their careers. And so when I saw that, I would be able to help make change and also have social impact. That really motivated me to enter the world of diversity and inclusion and be able to pull together all those things that I just talked about that help me to thrive, which is the collaboration and the creativity side of things as well. And so that's what motivated me to work really in the diversity and inclusion arena and context, doing what I do.
Thank you. And I think you talked about collaboration, and I realized when I read your story that you talk about it a lot in the book as well. And you talked about the term conscious collaboration and how that had an impact on your perspective on life, especially growing up. So, how would you describe that, not only in the context of the corporate world, but also in the context of your childhood?
Yeah, sure. So conscious collaboration was something I came up with when I was going through the process of writing my story for Voices of Hope. And that enabled me to actually take time out and really reflect on my childhood and the key things that had happened. Because until then, you don't really do, well, I didn't do anything like that. Don't take time out to really reflect on key things that have happened and what the impact of that is. But working on that book enabled me to do that. And so when I reflected on my childhood, that's where I came up with the term conscious collaboration. And for me, what that meant was, growing up, prior to my mum meeting my stepdad when I was 8, her time was limited. There was only so much time she could spend with me if she's going to work. And there's only so many experiences that she can share because she's limited in that. And so I was very fortunate to also have my grandparents, who I used to spend a lot of time with when my mum would go to work. That's where the whole storytelling piece came in as well, because they'd share lots of stories about their respective countries that they came from. And so I had my grandparents, and I also had my aunts and uncles as well, who all contributed in my life, whether it was sharing advice, whether it was sharing experiences, or people that they know, connecting me to people that they know. So that's where I came up with the term conscious collaboration, because they were consciously contributing to my life. And actually what I learned from that is that, as an individual, you are limited in how far you can go. In order to progress further and quickly, you need to connect with other people. And that's where the beauty of it is. We can't operate on our own. We need to connect with other people and people with different experiences, because that's where that adds a depth to us as individuals. And that helps to build us up as well in terms of what we can share.
What I like about that is it reminds me, or when I looked at that term, it really reminded me of the saying that it takes a village to
raise a child. Yes.
And I definitely think that, with Seidea, it's all about community. And it's understanding that you're not by yourself in your journey, whether it's learning, whether it's trying to enter or job searching or actually entering and trying to progress. It's like you said.
Sorry, Steph, I've lost the sound. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
I can, yeah.
I was saying that conscious collaboration is being intentional.
Yes.
The community that you serve, in the community that you are in,
Yeah.
and also intentional with your goals. So let's say, someone's in Seidea, it's being intentional, like this is what I want from the community, this is what I'm happy to do for the community. They also say in networking, because it's, especially like in cybersecurity, sometimes it's who you know.
Yeah.
And it's entering that networking relationship, not in a I'm here to take, but
absolutely.
I'm here to collaborate with you, to learn from you, and to also share my insight to also help you as well. And coming from that angle. Now, I know that we are from, I wouldn't say our generation is far off, but I know that you are a little bit older than me. And I do think, speaking to my mom, that there is a difference in what my generation perceives leadership, how we progress, career choices, and how the slightly older generation perceives leadership. So, what would you say that, or how would you say that your generation that you came from influenced your approach to leadership?
Yeah, sure. So I think my generation is characterized, or it's sometimes known as Generation X. And that is the generation that's between 1960 and 1980. So I'm obviously not going to tell you how old I am, but I'm between those decades. I think one of the characteristics of that generation as well is around, and I can't speak for the whole generation, obviously, but I can speak for myself. But one of those things is around being direct, and being direct in terms of feedback. And I think that in terms of my leadership, I would describe myself as being direct but diplomatic. So if something does need to get called out, I will actively do that. So I have worked on projects in the past where, if I've seen that there isn't diverse representation, either in imagery or at events in terms of panels and so on and so forth, or the makeup of the audience, I will raise that as a flag, and so that we can take action on it. So yeah, that's one part of my generation's leadership. Yeah, it's something that affects our leadership. I'd say the other thing as well is loyalty. I think the generation after me, the millennials, tend to be less loyal, just generally speaking, because they're very open to creating their own world and their own careers, which my generation didn't do. If you secured a role in something, you would stay, maybe sometimes beyond when you should have stayed, actually, because you love what you're doing and you want to stay loyal to the company, and it seems to be working for you. But what I love about the generation after me is they create their own roles and they make it happen. And so, yeah, that's what I've tried to do as well.
Yeah, I think that there is our generation each other, because like you said, a lot of people tend to think that millennials are not loyal, stay in a job for a year, sometimes 6 months, and are more volatile or sporadic in their decision making than the older generation. But I also think that we can learn a lot from your generation in regards just to insight, knowledge, experience. Experience is such a great teacher,
Yeah.
and we could be very, very passionate in what we are trying to achieve, that we don't take a step back and pause and have like a moment. So I definitely think something that we can also learn from your generation. And one of the things I definitely knew from the book was when you talked about the power of a smile in the book, and you said you were talking about body language, because although Seidea is a organization we focus on cybersecurity, I do think that having soft skills is very important in navigating your career and actually helping you, because people tend to think it's work hard, work hard, work hard, but
Yeah.
you have to have people currency, which is who do you know, how approachable, do you have a sponsor, someone who's in the leadership team that can vouch for you, and having
Exactly.
like that to help you with your career. So how important is body language? And how can it be utilized by someone who is keen to move up the ladder in cybersecurity?
Yeah, I'd say that body language is really important. And also, what's also really important is being self-aware, because sometimes you might not even be aware of the vibe or energy that you're giving off with your body language. And body language is also something that's very, what's it called, subjective. So people interpret things actually based on their opinion, based on their experiences. So broadly speaking, yeah, obviously, if you go around crossing your arms all the time, people don't think that you're accessible because it's like you've got a barrier up. But conversely, if you're quite open in your body language and you have, you smile a lot, people then will hopefully think that you're quite approachable. But then again, if you interpret it in another way, if you smile too much, people might think, she's always smiling, what's she up to? So it's very subjective, but it's something about being self-aware in terms of the body language that you are projecting, and also being aware of the culture that you're operating in at work, and actually look at the body language of people that have progressed. How do they behave? What are they doing? That could give you a clue or a cue as to how maybe you should modify some of your body language.
That's true. With like the body language thing, every organization has a different culture. So what might work in X might not work in Y. So
Exactly.
we definitely touch upon a good point, which is look at who's at the top and try to not obviously mimic them.
Yeah,
What are their body language? What do they do? And I think a few things I've learned in my career as well is that we tend not to approach senior leaders because you think, oh, they're way above you. And, the reason why sometimes they don't talk to people is because no one's approached them.
yeah,
So it's a thing where you have to have the confidence to speak. If it's someone that you really um, appreciate or you're inspired by, definitely reach out to them for a coffee. And the
absolutely.
is no. I'm saying, I'm busy. I can maybe see you in 3 months, 4 months, depending on how busy they are. But at least put yourself forward and they know who you are. So
Yeah,
I guess that as well as body language, definitely be proactive.
yeah.
Now,
And I was
I,
just going to add to that, the thing about the body language as well is to be authentic. So much as you look at the culture and see how the leaders are behaving, if it's not authentic to you and you start to emulate that, that's going to come across as really weird.
yeah,
So it needs to be authentic as well. And
yeah,
sometimes it might actually mean where you're operating isn't in alignment to who you are. That might be a revelation as well. So stop trying to be like the people at the top or the leaders. Stop trying to emulate them, because actually they don't value that.
that's true. And I think with being authentic also relates to self-awareness,
Yes. Yeah.
self-aware and understanding. And I think it can take a bit longer for some people, but it's just understanding what are your what are your key principles in life, and understanding and thinking to yourself, everything I do, does it feed in back to my core principles? And I think once you start to think that way, you're then behaving more, authentic. So let's say you're very passionate about the environment. How you can is by looking at opportunities where there could be corporate social responsibility, or it could even be raising money, fundraising, and telling your colleagues about it.
Yeah.
But you put yourself to work and not separate that, oh, I don't want them to think that, I'm hugging trees or whatever. But authenticity, like I said, is understanding your core principles. And sometimes your core principles might change, what you think is valuable at this stage may not be valuable. Like obviously for me, I'm not a mother, so a lot of things that I think are valuable now, in the future, if I am married or I do have kids, it will
Yeah.
probably change. So I think it's just taking understanding that your value, you evaluate it every year as you go, and don't be afraid to change it if it needs to be. I think.
Absolutely. And as you grow and develop as a person, you change. So it took me quite a while to understand, you know, what my values are and what my strengths were, because often it's things that you don't even think twice about, one of them was, you know, writing, because I always used to write lots of reports and proposals and stuff. I didn't think anything of it. And people would compliment me quite a lot over the years, wherever I've worked, on my writing. And I didn't think anything of it. And obviously, that whole writing piece was there all the time, but it wasn't what I was seeing, so I didn't tap into it. So it's being aware of those things that keep cropping up, and actually, why do they keep cropping up? What does that mean? And is that something you can use in a way that's part of your purpose and part of your principles? Which is eventually what I did with my writing, by writing 2 books, or co-authoring one of them and authoring the other one.
Yeah, and even the books itself, they're different but the same. And again, talking about like principles, they're different in the sense that they're both telling stories of inclusivity, but in different ways.
Yeah.
So with of hope, you are sharing your career, your corporate career, how you started, how you grew up, your childhood, and how you were able to move up the ladder. While with your adventures, children's book, it's inclusivity by showing kids that actually you can be in storybooks as well. You can do this as well. And I think that's,
Absolutely.
but again, it's showing back against that principle that those your focus is diversity and inclusion, and you show that with what you do, and it all goes into one. And I just appreciate it as someone
Oh, thank you.
who I am passionate about, and I think also what I loved when you read your Voices of Hope story was when you talked about traveling to Australia. And as someone like me, I'm a traveler myself. I love traveling every opportunity that I can leave the country.
Yeah.
Take it. And that's because travel opens your mind. I think for me, when I just had my big travel outside the UK and Nigeria, where I'm from, was Uganda. And that completely opened my mind because it made me realize what was important in life. So there, when I came back, there's certain things that I wasn't so hung up about because
Yeah. Yeah.
different perspective of life, and it really opened my mind. So
Mm.
I just wanted to, find out what was it like going to Australia and just having that whole new culture. I've never been to Australia, so I can imagine this. And I think when we think about Australia, the stereotypes tend to be like animals and
Yeah.
so how was that?
It was an amazing experience. And I've got to say, you know, when I shared with my parents that I wanted to go to Australia for 3 months, they thought I was mad. It's like, why don't you just take 2 weeks off and go on holiday? Why do you have to quit your job? But it was something I really wanted to do at that time. I was 25, and I just thought, I need to get away, experience something different, and hopefully come back refreshed and with a new focus. And so I went there with my friend and traveled traveled around the country. And that was something I've never done before. That's the furthest I've ever been away from my family, the longest I'd ever been away from my family. So they were obviously very concerned. But what that trip taught me was that I had this ability to connect with people that I'd known even in the shortest amount of time, and have conversations with them and become friends, essentially, because there'll be some things that my friend that I traveled with, she's into certain things that I'm not. Like, I don't really like going on boats and things like that, but she loved doing stuff like that. So she'd organise trips to go on that, and I'd stay very much on land. And in that process, I'd always meet random people, and then end up making lunch with them, and then sitting down having a conversation. And by the time my friend would come back from the excursion, I'd be introducing her to loads of new people. And yeah, again, it's one of those experiences which at the time you're just in it and you're enjoying it. And I'm learning about the culture and also about Aboriginal culture as well, which was very interesting. But when I reflected on it, when I came back like years later, that's where I was kind of putting into practice the ability to connect with people, which is then showed itself up in my career when I'm networking, because, you know, I can know you for 5 minutes or 4 years. I can still have a conversation with you. You might work in engineering, or you might work in, I don't know, oil and gas. I can still have a conversation with you because there's always questions to ask. And so that experience really helped. It helped me understand who I was, and it helped me to understand some of my strengths as well. And it was in Australia that I experienced that my smile was my superpower. I think that's where all the conversations started, is because you know, maybe I had a smile and people connected with me, were able to connect with me that way.
I think in the topic of traveling, how important do you think it is as a young professional in cybersecurity? And you might think that, you know, especially things of obviously right now, coronavirus, things are quite constrained. No one knows when they're going to travel next. But how important it is for professional development for someone to take maybe an opportunity to either volunteer or take a job elsewhere that's not in the UK?
I would say I would 100% advocate for that. If you can have an opportunity to travel as part of your career, take it, because it just adds a depth to you that somebody else won't have, and it's adding to your wealth of experience already in cyber security. And so when you actually bring that to the table or share different experience about it, it offers perspectives that other people would never have had. And so I'd say it's you know, if you get an opportunity to travel early in your career, go for it, because whilst you haven't got anything that you're strongly committed to or is, you know, keeping you from traveling, like children or a partner where it can get a bit more trickier, do it and get it out of the way. Which is why now, because I've done all that, I don't feel like I'm missing out on anything, because I've done a lot of traveling in my time.
Okay. I think coming back to, you know, what you talked about, collaboration, networking, and connecting with people. What do you think? What is the importance of having a mentor and a sponsor? And what are the two different roles in someone's career?
Yeah, I'd say they're both very different. So a great way how I remember this is that mentors are people that talk to you, and sponsors are people that talk about you when you're not in the room. So it's a really easy way, hopefully, to remember. And a mentor will, you know, offer you guidance and support along your career. But these are people that you should be seeking out. So if you've identified maybe there's a gap in your knowledge in cybersecurity, it would be a good idea for you to look up who are the leaders or who are the movers and shakers in that particular sub area, you know, whether it's data, whether it's policy, whether it's human behavior or data protection. Look and find out who are the key people in that particular area, and actually how could they help you on your journey to develop. And now, as I mentioned, sponsors are people that talk about you when you're not in the room. So how are they even able to do that? Well, in the first instance, they need to know what you're up to. So there's no point being at your desk, just head down, immersed in work constantly, and not getting involved in things outside of the projects you're working on. So it's really important to share with as many people what you're up to. I mean, if I didn't share with you some of the things that I did, I wouldn't have this opportunity. And it's something that I'd never planned, or it's something that wasn't on my radar, but it was just in that sharing, it's led to this, which has been amazing. So it's, you know, in terms of building sponsors, it's really good to share with as many people as possible what you're working on, what you've achieved, what your passions are, what your aspirations are, because if there's a project coming up in a certain part of the business, then who do they think of? Oh yeah, Stephanie, because I remember she said she was working on a project on data protection. You know, so that's how you can go about building sponsors, but also the mentors that you seek, they can then let their other people they know in their network know about you, which then creates a sponsor, because they can vouch for you. Your mentor can vouch for you. And so, you know, if a sponsor opens the door to an opportunity, they know that their neck's not going to be on the line because they've been given some information that's trustworthy.
That is true. I think it speaks to having a personal brand in work. You know, what is your personal brand at work? And even when I think about my own career, the little things that I did, you know, you might think it's tiny, but being in a position where you get to engage with the wider community is always a great opportunity. So for me, I had the opportunity to be the editor of Policy.
Sorry, I can't hear you very well.
Okay. So I said, like for me, I had the opportunity with my first role to be the editor of our internal policy journal, which
Yeah.
involved me going to different teams, speaking to them, and collecting stories. But because I was in that position, I was able to network to a wide range of people.
Yeah.
My last role, I decided to, you know, I saw that there wasn't any BAME network, so I decided to put myself forward as a chair of the BAME network, which again allowed me to meet people outside of the team. And by having that, you know, having that attitude of putting yourself in positions that allows you to network
Yeah.
in a place where you're not only speaking to your team, outside team, is very important. And I think why it's important as well is, you know, we understand that sometimes racism happens and sometimes it happens within your team. And you might feel like you don't have any backing of anyone in your team.
Yeah.
So think about ways of how you can have sponsors outside of your team by putting
Yes.
up for employee network, things that allows you to engage with other people and to also have something outside of your work, because I think it's very important that if you're someone that, you know, like you said, put your head down and you're focusing on your work, if something happens, you know, it can easily knock on your confidence. And if that's all you have, that little bubble, it's very hard for you to build up your confidence.
Yeah.
But if you're able to spread out around of it, then you'll be able to have other aspects of the organization. So I really appreciate that, and just like the importance and how you know talked about personal branding.
Mm.
So I think, what would you say? And I think you touched on it in a bit, you know, when you talked about resilience. But as we're talking about diversity and inclusion, we do have to realize that there are still barriers. Some barriers that would be harder for people from minority communities, especially women, who
Mm-hmm.
burden of being women and from a minority community. How do you, what character traits do you need, you know, to be successful in navigating spaces that may not be made for you?
Okay, so I would say one of those things is the ability to connect and relate to people. That is really key, because if you can't connect with someone and have a conversation, there's going to be no engagement there. There's going to be no interest from the other person's side to want to know what you're up to or what you do, and how you can contribute. So really and truly, one of the traits I'd say is having the ability to connect and relate to people. And if you don't know how to do that, Google it, or you know, I can share some resources and places that you can, you know, go to and listen to webinars and things like that. But there's many ways in which you're able to do that. And I think that's one key way to be able to do that. And if you understand someone that's different to you and understand the culture in which they operate in, that will help you, because bearing in mind, if you're a minority woman as well, you have grown up in a different culture most of the time. And that culture might be the complete opposite of the culture you're operating in the workplace. And I'll give you an example, with my Ghanaian culture, it's not growing up. I wasn't necessarily encouraged to ask questions. So even though I was quite inquisitive, I've been told, but I don't, if you're to ask too many questions, that can be interpreted as you're challenging the person. But I found that in the workplace, you're expected to have an opinion. And so for me, it was difficult to navigate around that, because often I wouldn't share my opinion on anything. And that can be interpreted very differently, the whole kind of lack of confidence, because you're not sharing your opinion or, sharing anything, being very quiet. And so, yeah, going back to that, being able to connect to people, that's key. I'd also say curiosity, and that comes from the asking questions. Ask questions, because sometimes there are processes in place, but actually how does that process work in practice? Nobody asks the question and just assumes it's just always been like that. But why has it been like that? Ask questions. And that's where, when you start asking questions, the curiosity leads you to some very interesting places. So what happened with me, for example, is in lockdown, I started I had a conversation with one of the leaders in cybersecurity, and she shared with me a piece of research about the lack of diversity in cybersecurity. So when I was reading that, I saw that only 15% of the workforce are women in cybersecurity, and that's compared to 28% in the whole kind of wider digital sector. And then I also found that only 16% of the workforce are from ethnic minorities. And so that's where I started doing some more research and was being really curious. And that led me to a conversation, to a connection to this. And then it's led me to this. So it's really important, if you want to progress in your career, to be curious. Don't just accept things as they are. Be curious, ask questions, and do your own research as well, which is where the proactivity piece comes in. And obviously, continuously, you've got to continuously learn, because cybersecurity is an area which is always evolving and very rapidly as well. So that's definitely another trait that, I would say that you need to be continuous learner.
No, I agree with you. And I think having what I liked what you said was having an overview, having that kind of bigger picture mindset. How does this little thing that I do, how does it impact the business? And I think, especially in the private sector, if you can find ways of saving money, they always love that.
Exactly.
And now I'm thinking, some people might think that I'm shy or I'm an introvert. How do I connect with people when that's not my default nature? I'm naturally someone who, keeps to myself, works. And I think, with careers such as cybersecurity or ICT, it tends to attract a little bit of introverts, because sometimes you work in silos or you can work in team, but you're working a large amount of time on the computer. You might not have interactions, or the people in your team might not be interactive. So in those situations, what advice would you give?
Okay. So that's a challenging one, because I'm an extrovert. I love to get out and about, talking to people. But yeah, I guess when you're an introvert, you do again have to think about approaching it in a way that's authentic to you. So maybe it would be whatever you're working on, maybe sharing that on the, you know, the intranet, so that then creates some visibility for you in an authentic way. I think that's one of the ways I can think of. And maybe just reaching out, you know, on email to someone in a different team and getting to understand what it is that they do, which is helping you to build that big picture thinking. If that's something you would feel comfortable doing, you know, small steps and everything. But I think a great way is to showcase the work or the projects that you're working on the company intranet, or even with, you know, someone that leads your department, so that they can see it and share it.
I like that. And I also liked your use of having small meetings, because it allows you to, I think, also have a more authentic, you know, relationship with who you're discussing with, because you guys can talk in a higher depth than you being in a group setting. So I think that point will definitely be useful for introverts who tend to like small gatherings, small internet sessions as well.
Yeah.
And I think now we're going to move on. I think speaking about your childhood, we've talked about the soft skills that, you know, women from minority groups need to survive in the workplace. Now I'm going to move on to the next stage, which is motherhood. And you talked about entering a corporate slumber at a, you know, a certain stage in your career where you had to balance work-life balance. And I think, you know, for women who haven't reached that stage yet, or for women who are approaching that stage, what advice, looking back now, would you give yourself?
Yeah. Okay. So the corporate slumber, that was where I woke up from my corporate slumber when my role was at risk of redundancy, and I was pregnant with my first child. And that actually led me to come out of my bubble, because it wasn't enough for me to be really passionate about the products that I was working on. And, you know, at that time, I was delivering my results, I was hitting targets. But in the process of finding out that my role was at risk, that made me look at, actually, where does this product sit in the grand scheme of things? And that's when I realized it was really like a small fish in a huge pond. And so as a result of that, I've always now only ever worked in areas that are growing, because that role that I was working on, the market was actually contracting. But even though, you know, I had relationships and people were still committing and spending money, that wasn't good enough. And so that was where I woke up from my corporate slumber and thought, you know what, Joyce, you've been sleeping. You know, it's not enough to just love what you're doing, delivering results, loving your clients and all the rest of it. So that was a real jolt. And then, of course, you know, we worked something out and I stayed on with that company. And then I had to adjust to having a child and working full time and how all that works. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think I'll be able to have done all of that without the support of my husband and my family. And I think it's really important, you know, to think about the partner you settle down with. You know, my husband's been very supportive and very encouraging. And along the way, when I've applied for different roles, often I'd be like, when I get the job description, like, I can't do that. That's like, there's so many things on there. I'm not going to apply to that. And he'll look at it and be like, well, you told me you do this. I heard you do that the other day. You can do all this. Just go for it, Joyce. And then I'd go for it, and then I'd end up getting the role. And he would support me in the background, especially, you know, with the childcare as well. If I have to travel to not abroad or anything like that, but maybe, you know, somewhere like Manchester or Leeds, he would be able to be there for the children and help support me in that way. And that's how I was able to really achieve the whole kind of work-life balance, and it's with the support of my husband and also my extended family.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
those are some of the things, you know, to think about. Yeah, as somebody said to me at an event, they were talking, there were a panelist on the event said, pick your partner wisely. Pick your partner wisely. So
To be fair, I think that's an honest answer, because even reports, they show that as a woman, who you marry definitely has an effect on your career. So that's a valid, very, very valid point to make. Now, I think we've spoken about, someone who's just become a mother. So let's say you're now going back to work after, maternity leave. And I know for some women it could be a bit difficult because you've been out of work for a while, you don't know if you still have it. And I'm sure motherhood changes, your hormones changes. How can someone, especially if someone feels like when you come back, it may not necessarily be the same team you left, there could be changes, you might be put on another team. How do you then start almost from ground zero again, building your confidence and building those networks?
I think the first thing I'd say to any woman going back after maternity leave is to acknowledge the journey that you've been on. You know, you've taken that time out of your career, whether it's 6 months, whether it's a year, whether it's anything in between that. Just take the time out and acknowledge your journey, because in that process, you would have learned a lot about yourself, and you would have actually learned how strong and resilient you are. So that's one of those things. And when you do that, I believe that will help you with your confidence. Because if you actually acknowledge what you've been through, and you're still here, and you're now about to start a new chapter in your life, that should help build your confidence initially. So that's really, really key. And also look at the skills and what you've learned in that time, because often these are things that you can take back into the workplace, and you're going to be much more focused. I think for me, I was so much more focused after I had my daughter than before, because I knew that, right, I need to be able to hit my targets so that I can get, extra commission so we can have some treats and do nice things. And I need to, really focus and be able to help provide my family with the best things that they deserve. And so, yeah, that's one way. The other thing as well you should do is look at trying to build your network as best as you can. Whether that is attending online meetups, because now everything's gone online. Eventbrite is a great way of being able to find out for any event that's going on in your industry sector, or around the role that you do in cybersecurity. Try and attend events, online events, things like that. And yeah, the other resources I would point these mums to is We Are the City. To check out We Are the City, they have great resources on, developing yourself in the background. So, and they're free. And then also Voice at the Table, check them out as well. They've got great resources in terms of content on their website, and also access to webinars that again can help develop your career or personally develop you. And these are things that you can be doing in the background to help build your confidence, so that when you're in the office, you feel good about yourself, and you're not going through that whole self-doubt and thinking you're not good enough, or thinking I'm only a mum, when in fact, you're not. You come with a lot of different skills and a different perspective of things, again, which is hugely valuable. So do share.
No, I love that. And I think now, moving on from that, feel like we've been moving along a path is, we hear the words, you can't be what you can't see.
Mm.
Now, I feel like, especially when we're having the whole generation discussion, what do you think senior leaders need to do, especially senior female leaders from minority backgrounds? What do you think they can do at this time where diversity and inclusion has come to the forefront? Because some of them might be thinking, well, I don't know if I have the time to mentor. I don't know what I can do to contribute and help the next generation. What advice would you give them?
I would say, be visible. There are senior Black female leaders that are out there that are visible. And, there's a piece around being visible, coming out, taking your head out of the sand and being visible so other women can see who you are and what you're doing. And give people access to you. Make yourself accessible, because you're going to be a role model for someone. The mere fact that you've gone through certain things in your career, share that so that people know that, right, this person has been through that and they overcame it. So if they did it, I can do it too. So it's be visible, share their stories, and make time and be accessible. Because I spoke with a senior leader on Monday, actually, and I've been watching some of a senior leader in cybersecurity, what should I say, and I've been watching her videos on YouTube and was really inspired. So I was really looking forward to talking to her. And we had a half an hour call scheduled in the diary. But in the end, we ended up talking for over 2 hours. And I was blown away by that. That was like an amazing Monday afternoon. And what that showed me was she made herself absolutely accessible to me. And she gave me some really good insights and recommended I connect with certain people. And that was so valuable. And I think that is a great example of a senior leader and what they should be doing to help other women, whether they're minority or not, but helping them to progress their careers in cybersecurity.
Thank you for that. Now, back to diversity, and I guess this era of Black Lives Matter. How would you describe diversity? Because I think now we have different arguments of what, diversity is. Is it diversity of thought? Is it diversity of neurodiversity? So, in your words, how would you describe diversity, or what would you say is the true utopia of a diverse organization?
Okay, so I'll start with what I think diversity is. And diversity is very much looking at characteristics that make you different. And so there are different strands of diversity. So whether that's gender, your race or ethnicity, sexual orientation, disability, or your age, or your religion. Those are the ones that come to my mind. And those are the different strands. So diversity is very much around the differences. And inclusion is about making those differences work when they're all round the table. And I think a really good way of remembering the difference between diversity and inclusion is that diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being invited to dance. That's a great way for me to remember them. And yeah, so that's what diversity is, in my words. And I think it's just so important now more than ever to have representation. Because what happens is if you are not at the table or you are not in the room, when products or services or solutions are created and they don't take you into account, What happens next? So that's why it's so important that, you know, as a minority woman or coming from a minority background, it's really important to have a voice at the table, to share your opinions, to flag things up, because if you don't do it, who will? And so if a product is made and it doesn't take you into account, what happens next? And I think one of the things that really brought it home for me was a couple of years ago when Tesla was testing the driverless cars.
Yep.
And it was interesting for me that the first fatality when they tested was a woman that died. So it made me think, you know, when they were creating that car and creating the programming, who was round the table?
Men, most likely.
Exactly. And so that's just an example of why it's so important that you should show up, participate, and contribute, because it could have such a huge impact, you know, socially, economically. You know, you need to share your voice, share your opinions, and you know, like why I'm here. I don't work in cybersecurity, but I think by sharing my experiences outside of that and relating it to the cybersecurity community, I hope that would be a valuable contribution.
No, it is a valuable contribution. Even me, I've learned so much myself. I think the final question before I open it to the audience is looking at now, you know, I think the topic on everyone's lip is what's next. We don't want this to be a trend, and we've seen it before where diversity and inclusion has been a trend. It's how from a minority perspective, how can we take opportunity of what is happening now? Because I think for the first time in a while, people are listening. We have more allies than ever. And I think this is a very critical time in our history for us to take advantage of, especially in our career advancement. So, what advice would you give to young women in cybersecurity who are hoping, especially minority women, hoping to excel in their career or to advance in their career? I think we've heard with the Black Professionals Network, Kike talked about employee activism, which is, you know, one way. But in your words and your, you know, your approach to it, what do you think we can do now to take advantage of this time?
Yeah, there's a few things that you could do actually. One is if you're invited to events or if you're invited for anything, show up where possible, show up, because that's the point. A lot of the time we're not even in the room. So show up, participate and contribute. That's one thing that you can do. And I'd say that's one small step that you can take. Another thing that, you know, you could do is take the lead and initiate like an event, you know, like a small event, a lunch and learn, and make that a topic that it could be related to diversity and inclusion. This is, as you said rightly, now there's a lot of people listening and they want to understand lived experiences. So you could use that as an opportunity to create a lunch and learn, and people share their lived experiences so people can get access to that. And also that's a great way of being able to network with other teams as well. So I would definitely say do that. And yeah, share your story as much as possible. Share with as many people as possible what your story is. And also, if you can, invest in a coach, because a coach is going to be able to help you accelerate your career exponentially. So those are the things I'd say, you know, what next? And then that will help you, you know, if you've got a coach, that will help increase your visibility, because they will stretch you. I've got a coach, and that explains part of the reason why I'm here. You know, trying to stretch myself. I've never done a live stream interview before, and I said yes to it. So yeah, invest in a coach. That will help accelerate your career and hopefully increase your visibility, just so people know that you're there, and then start sharing your lived experience as much as possible.
No, those are great words or great pearls of wisdom, Joyce. I think now I feel like we've spoken for an hour.
Wow.
We're now opening it up to the audience. Does
Okay.
anyone have any question on what we've discussed or to Joyce? Please put in the Q&A and we'll be able to answer everyone's question. And you feel comfortable. If you don't want to put your name, you could also ask a question anonymously as well. But I also think in the meantime, while we'll wait for questions, is to talk about, I think you've done a lot of research on cybersecurity, and we tend to have a lot of professionals who come to our platform who are already in the field. But I think it's definitely nice to have someone who's out of the field to give their perspective on what do you think the future is for cybersecurity from your perspective.
Okay, great question. What do I think the future is? Well, that's a huge question. Well, with the fact that we're all working from home now, I think that's something that will impact, obviously, companies and the threats that are, going to be taking place. So, yeah, that's a big question. Look, the future, we can't predict the future. We can't predict the future. And what makes it interesting is that even 4 months ago, we wouldn't have been able to predict where we are now, which is why, you need to be proactive and be doing research and reading up on trends and being curious, because actually that's how you're going to survive in uncertainty. It's by being curious, it's by being creative and having to think outside the box, and also by collaborating with people. And that's what the future holds. I mean, what this pandemic has shown me, and it's really brought it home, is that robots won't be taking over the world anytime soon. That's definite, because people need people.
Yep.
That's definite.
I just looking at our Instagram, and it's we've got some questions here. Now, the first question, I think I could possibly answer that, and that is, what jobs are available and how can you get into the cybersecurity industry? So what I will say is that there are when you think about cybersecurity, it's easy to think about it in two different streams. You have your information security, and then you have your information systems security. So when you're looking at information security, that deals with how do you protect data? So that can be privacy jobs, the roles that have to pertain with data protection. It can also be business continuity. So that is, once a business has been attacked, what next? How do they continue and how do they keep going? Now, with information security, it could also be awareness training, because not all the threats are outside hackers trying to hack into your system. Sometimes the threats are caused internally by employees. So it's also teaching them awareness so that they would be able to modify their behavior to increase security. There's also infrastructure, which has to deal with, when you're protecting information, it's not just online safety, but it's also physical safety. So stuff like who gets into the building? Are there areas that needs to have special level of security clearance for you to get in there? So that again deals with information security, but also looks at physical controls, technical controls, as well as online controls. And then you have your information systems security, and that deals more with protecting networks, computers, phones, IoT devices, systems that hold this critical data. So that's when you tend to have more of the more technical roles. That could be penetration tester, it could be a SOC analyst, it could be a cybersecurity consultant, or it could be someone who is analyzing or projecting, the cost of an attack in zero point 0.5 seconds, for example. And that's more looking at the system side of things. And that tends to be the more technical side of cybersecurity. Now, I think the second question is a lot of questions about cybersecurity.
I was
So
just going to add to that. I know that you shared with me as well around human behavior in cybersecurity. And I found that very fascinating because I saw the link between, human behavior in cyber and individuals and how they behave online with what I was doing in diversity and inclusion in trying to help change people's behavior as well, getting them to understand that difference is good. There's nothing bad about it, and actually going through that process of unlearning bad habits. So maybe you can share a little bit about that as well, actually, the human behavior aspect in cybersecurity.
yeah, the human behavior aspect of cybersecurity is very important because it's a psychology of things. And sometimes with that, they tend to be roles in which you have to play the bad guy. You have to think in the mind of a criminal. What is a criminal going to do in this situation? Sometimes they even pay people to try and break into the building to see how vulnerable is their security system, both physical and with a computer. With that report, you're then able to then come up with recommendations. So it could that people are saving, having like issues with templates. They take a template, and then instead of deleting, the work that they've done, they leave their work and, replace the template, which then has the data information of people that shouldn't be available to people who are not that specific person. Now, you might think that's a harmless thing, but that's again, it's coming to the issue of convenience. So in information security, there is this, battle between being convenient and so someone might think, oh, I can't be bothered to like not do this and go through the extra steps. But then when it comes to that behavior, it's teaching them that actually, no, you have to take things slowly. You have to, reduce your convenience, because the long term could be you might be sued, because if the information gets into the wrong hands, that person can sue your company. There are also even financial sides of it when you have cybersecurity insurance. So it's a very broad industry. And similar to tech, how every industry has a tech part, now with the whole coronavirus as food tech, it's to understand what is the cybersecurity element of it, what is the security element of it. So if it's a health app with those biometric data, what is the security risk of those data? Do they need to collect all those data? What is the data protection around that? You need to start having that mindset, and then that would allow you to understand what opportunities are there in the various industries. I'm seeing how can Africa get into the cybersecurity sector. Well, thank you, Eunice. There's actually a lot of organizations that I would recommend who are doing a lot of space in cybersecurity in Africa. There's an organization called She Secures, which is a kind of similar to us. They're an organization for African women in cybersecurity, and they do a lot of work around different African countries. Also, there is Kenyan women in cybersecurity. There is Rwandan women in cybersecurity. Almost a lot of countries, women in cybersecurity. So if you go and look Twitter, Facebook, social media, you will find them. And if you engage with them, they can then give you a more tailored information of what's happening in your region. Because unfortunately, although we are global in our reach, we are pretty much a UK company in our examples. And I think the final one is digital currency impact and cybersecurity. So I would say if you want to go into that, Eunice, it's for you to understand cryptography, which is the mechanism, the cybersecurity mechanism behind blockchain. And then once you read up on that, you can kind of understand what are the issues with cryptography, and then also understand how that's likely to impact cybersecurity moving on forward. And I have a question here, which I think you can answer, Lorraine. So that is, what motivates you to, want to research more about cybersecurity, or to, really dive in and talking to different people within the industry?
One, it's because it's an area that is growing, and it's rapidly growing, and it's something that touches on my life. I use online banking and buy things online. And so for me, there's the individual aspects of it. Actually, how can I be safer online? But also the broader aspect that as an industry sector, it's growing, but there aren't enough diverse people in this sector. So that means that anything that's created, it's only going to be limited. It's only going to go so far. And so that's what really interests me, is how can we actually increase the diversity that's in cybersecurity? Because it's really, really important. I'm really passionate about that, about having representation in industry sectors, or in books, in children's books, in everything. It's really, really important.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joyce. And I think even with that, with the diversity discussion is, we talked about that in our previous newsletter, that with the research that you're talking about from DCMS, it doesn't break down to see which minority groups are actually being represented.
Mm.
That is the Black, is it Asian, is it Black African, is it Black Caribbean, is it East Asian? And because these numbers are so nuanced, it's very hard to identify or pinpoint where the problem is. Is it, which community group, which minority group are being the least represented, and
Yeah.
how to get them in to then solve the issue you talked about, when you gave, I guess, the most extreme example of Telstra, where a woman lost her life because it wasn't catered to her. And I think there's been a lot of discussions with artificial intelligence, and it not being able to take dark skin, and you can see it when you're going
Yes.
when you're traveling. And there's so many times where I've had to go and speak to someone because my passport, the e-gate is just not working.
Yeah.
And having those minds, and I guess people who have the expertise in positions of decision making, to actually being able to say, actually, no, that's not going to work, because I know from experience this, the X, Y, and Z, so we need to then change X, Y, and Z.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely do think cybersecurity has a longer way to go, unfortunately, because it's not similar to coding. Coding, there's been a lot of talk, there's a lot of, women in code, women in tech, and
Yeah.
sometimes in tech it's complaints of women in code. So it makes it, difficult, because we haven't had that sort of publicity,
Mm.
in cybersecurity. And cybersecurity is one of those fields that I think has been, I would say, the tower effect, that people who have the knowledge, not that they didn't necessarily want to share it, but I just think that there's a huge gap, and people tend to think that cybersecurity is much harder than it is.
Mm.
Which is why I created Seidea, because I wanted to demystify it, that it's not as difficult for you to enter the sector. You just need to understand what part do you like auditing? Okay, there's an auditing part of it. Do you like talking to people, like you said, collaboration, people? Is
Yeah.
that the awareness training, side of it? And once you don't know those things, you then think that, like, I don't want to do this, it's too hard. And that's definitely not the kind of message I want us to put forward.
Yeah.
So I think right now we have 10 more minutes. Any more questions? Because I feel like if me and Joyce continue talking away, we won't be able to bring everyone in the conversation. So please, 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 if you have any questions, I'm trying to look, don't think my eyes is everywhere, but I'm trying to look at the Zoom and the YouTube at the same time, so that I can be able to get a full view of the questions. But I think, you know, as we are going to the end of the conversation, is what are the final words? I think we've discussed a lot of things today. We've talked about childhood, motherhood, you know, moving your way through the corporate ladder. And we've also talked about being in a positions of authority and how women can also open the doors for other women. What is your final point you want to give to the audience?
I'd say my final point is it starts with you. So you need to take the action and be the change that you want to see. If you're not seeing something, if you think something is missing, you know, why don't you create it and put it there? You know, don't be afraid. If you need to research it and be proactive and be curious in order to get there, then do that. That kind of happened with me in terms of the children's story. And that took me 8 years, you know? So I'd identified that there weren't any characters in the children's stories that were Black. And so 8 years after meandering and going around the mountain and all the rest of it, I realized that actually it's down to me to make that happen. There's no point in thinking someone else is going to write a children's story with Black characters. Who's more passionate about it? It was me. So whatever it is that you are passionate about and you've seen that it's missing, let it start with you. You be that person that creates it and puts it there, or collaborates with people to create it and put it there, so it can help others, just like Seidea has been created to, you know, help a lot of BAME women in cybersecurity.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Joy. It's been a complete, absolute pleasure having you here. I've learned a lot, taking mental notes as you were talking, and I just really appreciate you giving your time talking with me today and just sharing your pearls of wisdom to other women in our community. How can our community reach you? So what is the best way if they wanted to contact you, reach out to you? How can they do that?
Yeah, sure. So I'm on LinkedIn and I'm also on Facebook, Joyce Osei, and on Twitter, I'm Joyce Osei 17. So you can reach me on either of those channels. And I'd love to hear from you, because I obviously want to connect with more women in cybersecurity and hear what you're up to and how I can support you.
Okay, thank you so much, Joyce. I'm going to end the conversation now, but again, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I can't wait to see what this video looks like when we look back at it on YouTube.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Steph. It's been great. It's been great experience.
No worries. Well, take care.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.